What happens when love turns toxic? When the person you trust the most becomes your greatest threat? Can the truth ever truly be uncovered, or does the darkness cloud everything? A life cut short. A man in cuffs, but was it really murder, or something far more complicated? At first, it seemed like an open and shut case. Jealousy, rage, a violent crime. But as the investigation unfolded, the truth began to slip further away. There were more questions than answers, and soon the lines between right and wrong blurred beyond recognition. Or was Derrick Collins truly the murderer? Or was there someone else hiding in the shadows? Who was the real threat lurking in this deadly game? In 2020, Derrick Collins was arrested for the brutal murder of his girlfriend in their Michigan apartment. But the question on everyone's mind is this: what truly happened that night? Derrick and his girlfriend, Jane Doe, had been in a relationship for over a year. To the outside world, they seemed like just another couple living their lives, making plans. But behind closed doors, cracks were forming, cracks that would soon lead to tragedy. The night Jane was found dead in their apartment, the scene was unsettling. A young woman, full of life, was gone. No signs of forced entry, no obvious cause of death. But one thing was clear: the tragedy was not just an accident. Something was terribly wrong. Inside the apartment, there were no signs of struggle, but the disarray suggested something more. Something was clearly out of place. Jane had been found lying on the floor, her life snuffed out under mysterious circumstances. The detectives knew immediately that this case would not be simple. As the detectives combed through Derrick's personal belongings, they uncovered troubling messages, texts exchanged between Derrick and Jane, showing signs of tension. A heated argument just days before her death. But was this a sign of something deeper? A simmering issue in the relationship? Or was this just an ordinary spat? They were quiet, but there were times when you could hear them arguing. I never saw anything too out of the ordinary, but it always felt like there was tension between them. I never thought it would come to this. Derrick was always the quiet one, and Jane, she always seemed happy. But there were days she would call me, telling me things didn't feel right. I just thought it was normal relationship stuff. What did Jane know that no one else did? What did Jane know that no one else did? Could it be that her intuition was right all along? Or were the signs of danger simply invisible to those around her? Derrick, where were you on the night Jane died? Derrick's alibi was shaky, and inconsistencies in his statements began to raise alarms. But there was something even more troubling. The phone records. Derrick had lied about his whereabouts, and the messages between him and Jane painted a picture of a relationship far more complicated than anyone realized. Was this just a tragic accident? Or was it the result of something darker, something hidden in their relationship? Could this be the work of someone who was pushed to the edge? Or was it cold-blooded murder? The investigation into Jane Doe's tragic death begins in earnest. As detectives step onto the scene, what first appeared to be a clear-cut case of jealousy quickly became anything but. Detective Sarah Mitchell and her team arrived at the scene, immediately noticing the oddity of the situation. There was no sign of forced entry, yet the apartment seemed to have an unsettling chaos. The victim, Jane, was found on the floor, but the rest of the room was eerily undisturbed. There was no obvious cause of death, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. At first, we believed this could be a domestic dispute gone wrong, but the lack of physical evidence left us with doubts. Nothing lined up with the typical signs of a violent struggle. Derrick Collins' story seemed to have too many inconsistencies. He claimed he'd gone to bed early that night, but the phone records told a different story. Derrick had texted Jane at 2:30 a.m., hours after he said he was asleep. Derrick said he'd been asleep, but his phone told a different story. Was he lying about the timeline? And if so, why? Why? I heard yelling, shouting, really. It was loud. I thought it was just another argument between them, but it didn't stop. Then it went quiet. Too quiet. The neighbor's statement clashed with Derrick's account. How could things have been quiet at that time if he was supposedly asleep? And if Jane had been arguing with him, what triggered the violent end? As the investigation progressed, more inconsistencies began to emerge. Derrick's story, filled with gaps, didn't quite match the physical evidence. His phone records, coupled with statements from witnesses, painted a picture of a man whose actions didn't align with his word. It wasn't just the phone record. Derrick's actions after the death were telling, too. Neighbors reported seeing him leave the apartment after the body was discovered without a hint of panic. Why hadn't he called the police right away? And why, when questioned, did his demeanor seem so calm? Derrick said he had found Jane's body and immediately called for help, but investigators noticed something strange. The first phone call Derrick made wasn't to 911, but to a friend. A move that seemed unnatural, considering the circumstances. Derrick's responses began to seem rehearsed. He denied any involvement, insisting the argument was about something trivial. But the way he avoided eye contact and shifted in his seat only deepened the suspicion. The more he said, the less believable he became. Then there was the CCTV footage that caught Derrick leaving the apartment, even though his statement said otherwise. Why had he left, and why hadn't he mentioned this to the detectives? What was he hiding, and why was he so desperate to keep the truth buried? Why did Derrick leave his apartment that night? What was he trying to hide? And why did his story keep changing? Was he truly guilty? Or was there something or someone else lurking in the shadows? Just when it seemed like the case was nearing its conclusion, a shocking twist surfaced, a new lead that would flip everything on its head. Derrick had told detectives he stayed inside the apartment all night, yet the CCTV footage revealed a startling contradiction. He had left the apartment in the dead of night, his movements so calm, so calculated. What was he doing? And then came the most startling development yet. A third party came forward. A neighbor who had been too afraid to speak earlier finally told investigators what they had seen the night of Jane's death. A new suspect had emerged, someone Derrick knew. Was this just an unfortunate coincidence, or had the real killer been hiding in plain sight all along? As investigators dug deeper into Derrick's life, it became clear that he wasn't just a man of seemingly calm demeanor. Beneath the surface, Derrick had secrets, financial strain, past betrayals, and unresolved emotional issues with Jane. Was this a crime of passion, fueled by jealousy and betrayal? Or was it a man pushed too far by financial pressure and personal failures? Derrick's history of stress, job instability, mounting debts, and a history of controlling behavior painted a picture of a man with everything. Derrick showed signs of emotional volatility, particularly in high-stress situations. The combination of jealousy, resentment, and financial instability could easily have triggered a violent outburst. His actions that night suggest he may have been desperately trying to maintain control of a relationship he could no longer handle. But was it only Derrick who had something to hide? A closer look at his relationship with Jane revealed complex dynamics. A woman caught between love and fear. Could it be that Jane had known too much? Had Derrick pushed her too far? Or was there another force lurking in the shadows? As the investigation drew closer to the truth, one question remained. Could the real killer be someone Derrick trusted? Or had his jealousy turned fatal, pushing him into an irreversible act of violence? The investigation that seemed clear-cut from the start was now unraveling at the seams. New theories emerged, each one at odds with the last, and the more the detectives dug, the deeper the confusion grew. The detectives began to see inconsistencies in the timeline. Derrick's phone records, initially a key piece of evidence, now showed unexplained gaps. At times, he seemed completely composed, while at other moments he appeared emotionally shattered. Could it be that Derrick was playing the system, or was he truly the one being wronged? As more contradictions emerged, doubts began to cloud the investigation. Was Derrick really the killer? Or were they simply chasing the wrong suspect? The mounting confusion left them questioning everything. With so many conflicting theories and pieces of evidence that didn't quite fit, the detectives began to question their direction. Was this truly a case of murder driven by passion, a man driven to the edge by jealousy? Or could this have been a case of self-defense gone wrong, with Derrick protecting himself from an escalating situation? The argument had turned violent. But was it murder, or had Derrick acted in the heat of the moment, defending himself from a volatile situation? The moral questions surrounding this case weighed heavily on everyone involved. Could this tragedy have been avoided? Or was it an unfortunate accident that spiraled out of control? Time was running out. Witnesses were disappearing, and critical leads were fading. As the investigation stretched on, the pressure mounted for the detectives to find the truth before it was lost forever. The case seemed to be slipping through their fingers. Key witnesses refused to cooperate, and leads that seemed promising just days ago were suddenly going cold. The detectives were at a crossroads. Was Derrick the killer, or was someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes? We're stuck. We've hit a wall. The evidence doesn't add up like we thought it would. Time's running out, and we're no closer to the truth than we were at the beginning. And then, as the investigation neared a boiling point, one final piece of evidence emerged, a small but critical detail that had been overlooked. Would this be the breakthrough they so desperately needed, or would it lead them further down the wrong path? Could this new discovery reveal a key to solving the case, or was it just another dead end? One last thread to pull before the whole case unraveled entirely? Time is running out. The truth is just out of reach, and the final pieces of the puzzle are slipping away. But as the clock ticks down, one final question remains. Is Derrick Collins the man who took Jane's life, or is there someone else out there, hiding in the shadows, ready to make their move. Ready to make their move. The trial of Derrick Collins begins, and with it the final chapter in a case that has gripped the entire community. The stakes are high. One man's life hangs in the balance, and the truth, though elusive, is about to be brought to light. To light. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here because Derrick Collins is guilty of murder, a crime committed out of jealousy, rage, and a desperate attempt to control a woman who no longer trusted him. The evidence is clear, and we will show you how Derrick's actions led to the senseless death of an innocent woman. The prosecution makes its case, laying out the narrative of a toxic relationship, of violent outbursts and control. They paint a picture of Derrick as a man who was driven by anger and jealousy, ultimately leading him to murder his girlfriend in a fit of rage. But would the jury see it this way? What we are presented with here is a tragedy. Yes, but it is not one born of malice. Derrick Collins did not intend for this to happen. This was not a crime of premeditation. This was a case of emotional distress and confusion. A man in a moment of personal chaos, defending himself from a situation that spiraled out of control. Oh. The defense argues that Derrick's actions were the result of emotional turmoil, that his mental state, exacerbated by stress, led him to act impulsively. But were these claims enough to cast reasonable doubt, or was the case against him too strong? I saw the way Derrick treated her. He wasn't always like that, but there were moments when he was too controlling. I didn't think it would lead to something like this. Witnesses testified to the volatile nature of Derrick and Jane's relationship. Family and friends described verbal arguments, sudden outbursts, and Derrick's need for control. But was this enough to explain why Jane was found dead in her apartment? In cases like this, we often see a cycle where one partner exhibits signs of emotional abuse and the other becomes isolated. Derrick's controlling behavior, combined with Jane's increasing emotional distress, could have created a situation where an outburst of violence seemed inevitable. The expert testimony painted a complex picture, one of a deeply troubled relationship, but it left the key question unresolved. Did this emotional turmoil justify what had happened that night? Was this a crime of passion, or was there something more sinister at play? You're telling me that a man who claims to be so emotionally distressed could then be so calm when he called his friend first, instead of dialing 911. How do you explain that, Mr. Collins? I wasn't thinking clearly. It all happened so fast. I didn't know what to do. The cross-examination casts further doubt on Derrick's version of events. Why hadn't he acted immediately to call for help? Why did his actions seem so calculated, almost rehearsed, when the stakes were at their highest? These questions would linger throughout the trial. The jury is faced with an impossible decision. Was this a case of a man driven to madness by jealousy and emotional turmoil? Or was it cold, premeditated murder, an attempt to silence a woman who dared to defy him? The victim's family, heartbroken and angry, spoke of a woman full of life, love and promise, whose life was cut short far too soon. But for Derrick's family, this was a tragedy of another kind. A man they loved, accused of something they couldn't fully comprehend. Could Derrick's actions truly be the result of emotional distress, or was he simply trying to justify a crime that could not be undone? And, most haunting of all, was he guilty of something far more chilling than anyone could imagine? The closing arguments echo in the courtroom. the final chance for both sides to sway the jury. Derrick's fate now rests in their hands. Would they be moved by the emotional weight of the victim's family, or would they focus on the circumstantial evidence that the defense so carefully laid out? The jury has been out for hours now. The weight of the decision is overwhelming. Did they see the whole picture? Or were they swayed by the emotional appeal of the victim's family? Was justice served in this case, or did the system fail to truly understand the complexity of this crime? As the final verdict approaches, one thing is clear. The truth, no matter how buried, will eventually rise to the surface. But will it be enough to bring justice, or will it leave us with more questions than answers? The final verdict has been delivered, but the truth might never fully come to light. What really happened in that apartment? Was Derrick Collins truly guilty, or was the full story buried beneath layers of confusion, deception, and unanswered questions? Despite the conclusion of the trial, the truth remains elusive. The truth we may never fully understand. The pieces of the puzzle are there, but they don't fit. The story is far from over, and the shadows of doubt continue to haunt this case. The finality of the verdict brings no true closure. Derrick's guilt or innocence remains clouded in ambiguity. And now, all we can do is wonder, was this the real truth, or just another chapter in a story too dark to fully comprehend? What do you think? Was Derrick Collins guilty of murder? Did justice truly serve its purpose? Or was there something or someone else lurking in the shadows? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear your theories. This case has shaken you just as it has shaken us. But the truth is far from clear, and our next deep dive will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. The darkness of this story may never fade, but will continue digging deeper. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the mysteries that still remain unsolved. Don't miss our next investigation. It will leave you questioning everything, just like this case has. Subscribe now and never miss a shocking story.